You should have a landline telephone. Every household, every business, every meeting place, every structure where people gather across the country should have a landline telephone. In the event of an emergency situation, it can be the difference between life and death. Over the course of my lifetime, I have unfortunately watched the landline telephone start to fall out of favor for cell phone only models. Cell phones have a number of advantages over landlines. They're also inferior in a lot of respects. Over the course of the last several months, I have had to place and receive a total of 3 emergency telephone calls, which is a lot more than usual for me. 2 of those calls had a problem. One of them was a success. 2 of those calls went through a cell phone. 1 of them went through a landline. There is a correlation there. The first emergency call I had to place took place back in June, late June of 2025. There was a heat wave taking place. It was very hot. There were several days over 100 degrees. There was no rain for weeks. It was extremely dry. And what was happening was some parts of the roads that had a lot of grass and dead weeds or whatever from the heat and the dryness was simply starting to combust from the excessive heat. That's the first time in my lifetime I've ever seen that. It's been so dry this year. Anyway, so the fires start breaking out on the side of the road. I was driving along one of these roads in the mid-afternoon, peak of the heat, and I saw a fire starting to smolder on the side of the road. So I stopped at the next cross street where I could safely stop, and I got out my cell phone because that's all I had with me, and I called 911 to report the fire. There's a multitude of things that can go wrong when you call 911 from a cell phone. One of those things is what happened. The call routed to the wrong town. This does still happen to this day. It's very common when you call from a cell phone. So I called 911, and within about 10 seconds, the call was answered by the operator. Pretty quick response. He asked me where the emergency was, and I said I was calling to report a brush fire starting at the cross street of roads X and Y. And the guy pauses for a minute and says, "What roads?" And I said, "Roads X and Y." And this is a main road. I was very surprised he didn't know what it was. And he paused for a couple more seconds, and finally he says, "I don't know where that is. What are you around? What's near you?" Fortunately, this was an area where there was a major intersection nearby and multiple well-known businesses in town, and so I said, "I'm near this business and that business and the intersection of this highway and that highway." And he still didn't know what I was talking about. So finally he asked me, "What town are you in?" And I said, "I'm in town L." And he says, "Oh, well, this is 911 for town N." I said, "Okay, well," and he says, "Well, we're going to have to transfer the call." Now, I expected this call transferring to be very quick. I expected it to take about as long as it took to make the initial call. So I'm expecting 10-15 seconds of wait time. It was several minutes. Now, of course, it seemed longer to me in person because I'm sitting there watching this fire start, and I can't tell the fire department where it is because I'm waiting on hold. But it was long enough for 2 separate people to also pull off the road, come over to me because they saw I was on the telephone, and say, "Did you see that there's another fire a couple, half mile up the road," or whatever it was. And I said, "Yep, I did see that. I'm calling it in. Thanks for letting me know," whatever. 2 separate conversations like that took place. They were probably only 25-30-second conversations, but case in point, it was enough time for that to happen twice. It was several minutes. Finally, the call goes through to the correct town, and that operator knew exactly what I was talking about, and that call with that operator, I don't even think it lasted 5 seconds. He knew exactly where it was and got somebody right out there. So that was a loss of, well, let's see, 2 to 3 minutes for this transferring to take place. And I don't know if that's normal or not. I don't call often enough to know if the transfer typically takes that long. I feel like it shouldn't, but at the same time, that should be a pretty routine operation. So I don't know. Well, there's a couple seconds wasted there, and we'll call it 45 seconds between the time that I placed the call, it was answered by the guy that didn't know where I was, and by the time he figured out that the call needed to be transferred. So we'll call that 4 minutes wasted. That's a long time. That is a very long time in an emergency. The second time I had to call was also for a fire. This wasn't a building. It was kind of like a outdoor covered pavilion thing. There was a cooking fire. We were doing some frying. I wasn't doing the cooking, I was only doing the eating. Fire got too hot and the oil flashed and it went up. That's a very bad situation. Fortunately, we had a bunch of intelligent minds there that did things that attempted to control it. Somebody threw a metal sheet over the fire. We sprayed a couple fire extinguishers at it, but it didn't seem like we were winning. So we decided it was time to call for help. I got out my cell phone and I typed in the numbers 911, and then I stopped and I says, wait a minute, I don't know where I am. This was a place I only go once a year. I knew the state and the town it was in, but I couldn't remember what the street name was, nor did I know what the number was. Now, I could have gone back to my car, which was a couple houses down, powered up my GPS, and gotten the address out of the history. That also would have taken several minutes. So I started asking around, you know where this place is? Do you know what the street is? Do you know what the address is? And of course nobody else knows, because everybody else also only goes there once a year. Plus now everyone's aroused because there's an emergency and people are forgetting things. So it took me a couple minutes to get someone that actually lived in the area and knew what the road was. And then he was able to call and describe where it was. Not good. When you have a structure fire, a couple minutes can be the difference between losing 1 or 2 rooms and losing the entire structure. Those couple of minutes matter. If there was a landline telephone at that structure, which there should be, there's utilities there, there's power, there's water, there's electricity, there's telephone poles, there's lights. There's no reason you can't run a telephone there. There should have been a telephone there. I could have grabbed that telephone and called. And when that call connected, the address of that building would have come right up on the operator's computer, and he or she would have known exactly where it was. Or, if the person hosting this event had a landline telephone at his house, I could have ran back to his house, which is only a couple houses down. I could have called from that landline telephone and said, we need help a couple houses down from this location. And the operator would have had the address of that telephone come up on the computer screen and could have sent help there immediately. And some people are going to say, oh, you should always know where you are. And that's valid, you should. But there's sometimes you just don't. It happens. There are valid reasons why you may not know where you are. And that was one of them. I just didn't know. And if we had the landline, it would have solved that problem. Aside from not knowing where you are, there are other times where you might not be able to say where you are. Let's say you are choking, for instance. You're not able to pick up your stupid iPhone and call 911 and say, I'm choking at 55 North Street because you're choking. If you have your landline telephone, you can call from 55 North Street, and the operator, as long as you stay on that line, is going to send someone there. If the operator is really good, he or she might even be able to hear you fumbling with the phone and struggling to breathe and send an ambulance right away. The third emergency call I had to place, actually no, this was one that I received, came through to my landline. I had a bunch of friends stay over for the weekend. One of them was married, and his wife stayed home. And in the middle of the night, there was an emergency situation that arose. His wife called his stupid iPhone, and I don't know, it didn't work for some reason. I don't know if the dumb thing didn't have signal, or stupid thing wasn't charged up, or the stupid thing doesn't ring loud enough. Whatever the reasoning was, it wasn't working. Unfortunately, his wife did not have my home phone number at the time, but she called a bunch of other people that she knew me, and one of them had my landline telephone number and called it. So this is about, I think, 4:30 in the morning. I'm sound asleep, and the telephone rings. I keep a loud telephone in the bedroom, and it wakes me up. I grab that telephone, and I don't recognize the number, and I answer it anyways, which is so important. You should always answer the telephone when it rings. This is like something that I remember developed like 5-10 years ago. This whole thing of people say, "Oh, I don't answer the telephone if I don't know the number." That's stupid. Answer the telephone. Why even have it if you're not going to answer the telephone? It's dumb. You never know when it's an emergency call. You never know when it's somebody calling from somebody else's telephone. I've received a bunch of calls over the years from people I know that were in different situations that had to call from somebody else's telephone because whatever reason the stupid cell phone didn't work. Sometimes they don't work. Anyways, I answered the telephone without recognizing the number, and sure enough it was somebody I knew. And that person told me there's a life or death emergency back at home, and the person that was here needs to call and get back home. And because I had that landline, I was able to walk down the hall after getting that call and say, "You gotta call your wife and get back home because there's a problem." If I didn't have that landline, that call probably would have gone unnoticed until the morning, and by then it could have been too late. The landline telephone is so much easier to use than these stupid cell phones. If you have a corded one, which you should, it's always in the same place. If you get into an emergency situation and you start to panic, the cell phones are complicated. You forget the password, forget where the stupid phone apps is, or the heck, I don't even know how to use those dumb things. I don't have one, never will. Whatever the case be, the landline telephone, you pick it up, it's sitting there on the wall, you just push the numbers. It's so easy. In an emergency, you're not going to forget how to use it because it's easy. It's not going to run out of charge. It's not going to be misplaced. It's always there, just hanging on the wall. And of course you can get a cordless one too, which is convenient, but you always should have a corded landline telephone. I have several. I have one in the bedroom. I have one down here in my studio room. I have one in the garage. I have one in the kitchen. All the areas where there potentially could be a problem and I need to call for help. I have them everywhere. They always work every single time. I have had my own personal landline for about 10 years. I got my own personal line when I was still living at my parents' house in the 2010s, just one of my own. And I took that landline when I moved here. And through the course of those 10 years, I can only think of one case where it actually didn't work. And it was because there was some kind of a weather-related disaster that took place where the main headquarters of this phone service was, and it caused a fairly brief outage. On the contrary, I can think of multiple times over the years where the cell phones have not worked. We had I believe it was called a micro burst or a macro burst, some kind of burst, a couple of years back in the 2010s. And it was bad. The wind and the rain, that was the most destructive storm I'd ever seen. It wiped this place out. And the cell phones stopped working after that storm. You were lucky if you could get a text message to go through. I guess the combination of multiple towers being out plus the increased volume of calls, the systems became overwhelmed and couldn't keep up with the usage. And I had a landline at that time, and it worked. I could call on my landline, but I could not make a consistent, reliable call on the cell phone. There was a couple weather-related cases like that I remember over the years, and then in more recent times, I would say this was within the last 2 years, there was several outages, really just for no reason, that affected several of the major big name wireless carriers in the New England area here. And there was a decent period of time where you could not place or receive calls using the cell phones, but the landline kept on working. At this point in time, you can get landline service for a couple bucks a month. It's simple, it's cheap, it's reliable, it's powerful, it's easy to use. There's no reason not to have it. You don't even have to use it. Just get the service, get a couple corded phones, have them in your house if there's an emergency. They might save your life. Those couple minutes when you're in an emergency, it can be the difference. There's no reason not to have a landline telephone. I'm keeping mine, and you should get one too.